In this exercise, we're going to look at the OpenAPI spec and experiment with it a little bit so that we can understand how that works and learn a little bit about documentation with APIs. So first of all, specification and documentation of a system's application programming interface, that's the API, are really essential to any architecture documentation, and that serves multiple stakeholders. In this exercise, we're going to work with OpenAPI spec, and we're going to use that to experiment with the RESTful API using the PetStore service, which is an example that Swagger offers. And then we'll use the Swagger UI to generate an interactive web-based documentation, a way to interact with that API, or at least to understand it, so that way you'll get a really good idea of what documentation can look like. And then we'll also use the Swagger Codegen to generate a mock server that you can then interact with locally. So first, let's get familiar with the Swagger tool set. I'm going to open that up. What Swagger offers is an easier way to develop your API using a set of tools. First of all, the power of the Swagger tools starts with an OpenAPI spec. This is the industry standard for RESTful API design. So let's take a look at that, because that's the main thing that we care about here. And we're going to use the OAS 3.1 in this exercise. And what this is a document that helps to standardize what an API should look like, and they call it the OpenAPI spec. So Swagger conforms to this specification, and this is the standard that many people use so that it's easier to work between different tools. All right. With that tiny overview, we see that Swagger is a set of open source tools and specifications that we can use to design, build, document, and consume RESTful APIs. There are 3 tools that we're going to use in this exercise. First, we have the Swagger editor. This is an open source editor that allows you to write OpenAPI in YAML or JSON. We're going to use YAML, and this editor gives you features like syntax highlighting and auto-completion, error checking, stuff like that makes it a lot easier to create and edit your API documentation. We're then also going to use the Swagger UI, and this is a web-based tool that generates interactive API documentation so that you can click through and actually try out examples and see examples for each of the endpoints. And then there's the Swagger Codegen, which we can use to generate code to build a server stub or a client SDK from that OpenAPI spec. So we will use this to create a server that we can then spin up locally. So again, overall, this tool set simplifies API development by providing the standardized approach to designing and documenting and consuming those APIs. Having the OpenAPI spec promotes that consistency, collaboration, and automation, and will help speed up the process to build your APIs, and helps improve the quality by having that consistency. We're going to use the Swagger editor first, so let's open that up. There is an old editor that you can also use, but we're going to use the newer version, and we're going to use the Swagger PetStore. And you can load this in the Swagger editor by clicking on File here in the screenshot, Load Example, and then OpenAPI 3.1 PetStore. Let's do that. File, Load Example, OpenAPI 3.1 PetStore. So what you can see now is on the left-hand side, I have my Swagger editor. And on the right-hand side, you can see what the Swagger UI would look like. And you can see here, doing a little bit of exploration, you've got this description area, you've got which server it's running from, you have different sections for endpoints. So you can see we have the pet, the store, and the user. And then we also have schemas, which are built into examples up in each of these. And then if you expand them, you can see the put, post, get, delete, all those CRUD request methods. So if you don't remember what those are, the main ones that we will look at today are get, and this is where you get you retrieve data. You're not modifying anything, you're just retrieving things. We've got post, which is where you post a new entity, a new thing to the database. Put is going to replace all the current representations of that target within the payload. Delete something. But the main ones we're using are get and post today. All right, so you can see it shows you what type of method it is, and then if you expand them, you have a description of what it is, and you can see all of this is defined in this YAML file. So in our path pet, you can see put, and if there's tags involved in it, you can see that. You can see a summary. The summary is to update an existing pet, and the description is update an existing pet by ID. So here you have those two descriptions, and then if there are any parameters, they would show up here. And then we have basically stubbed out examples of what will happen, and that gives us this interactive documentation that shows me an example of what the request body should look like that we would submit. And it also gives me the schema breakdown, which if I were to go down here to the schemas and then click on pet, you can see the schema reflected there. Okay, and we've also got responses. This is what a successful response would look like. It gives you the code, so 200 for a successful operation. And which media type do you want to see an example of? And then you can see that example there, and then also you have the schema there. You can also see there's the 400 code would be an invalid ID supplied, and a 404 would be the pet not found, and you're getting examples there. So if I were to say I want to try it out, then what it does is it gives me something that I can edit. What this is going to do is update an existing pet in the store, and then I would just hit execute. All right, so that's, and then you get the response here. So it also shows you the curl command with that same content. You can see here that it's using this as the request URL. You can see that the server response was a 200, and this was the response body, and then this was the example below. All right, so there's a little bit about how it works and where to find things. And again, this is the YAML. This is in the editor here on the left, and this is the UI that can be generated from this YAML using Swagger. And then it also shows our OAS version number. What we're going to do now is spin up our own API server from the Swagger mock servers. So to do this, first we need to generate the mock server, and you can do that from your PetStore 3.1 by using the Generate Server tab and then choose what you want. So I'm going to go to right up here, Generate Server, and you can see there's a lot of different options here. I'm going to choose the Node.js server, but if you prefer Python, you could try the Python Flask server. There's lots of options to choose from, but click the one you want. That's going to prompt a download for you, and you can unzip it. And then I'm going to launch Visual Studio Code. And inside of Visual Studio Code, I'm going to open my download, and I'm going to open that folder that I just downloaded. And inside of here, I have a README file that explains how I can start the server. You can also open the preview so you can see it in the formatted markdown version. So I'm going to open up my terminal down here. Now, I use NVM. You don't need to do this unless you have something set up on your machine. But I am currently in that generated server folder. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to follow this step, and because I downloaded this using the Node.js version, my instructions are to use npm start, which I already have npm and Node all installed on my machine. If you generate a server using a different package, you're going to have different steps to start your server. So npm start is what I need to run. That's going to automatically run npm install, which will add my node modules and any dependencies I have for this to work. And you'll see in this case, I actually have a validation error. And I think this is just an error they have in the validation package. But what you can do, and I actually have this documented. Let's close this folder. But I have this documented here. If you get an error that looks like this, which is the error that I'm seeing for validation errors, what's happening is we're mismatching the version it expects. We're working with OAS 3.1 and it's trying to validate 3.0. There is probably a better way we should go about this, and we should make sure the validator is validating the correct version. What we're going to do though, for just a quick easy fix, because I don't need you to chase this around, I just want you to understand how Swagger works. We're going to open up the file API OpenAPI.yaml, and we're going to just change this number from a 1 to a 0. Okay, so back in here, API OpenAPI.yaml, just change this to a 0, save it. I'm going to Control-C to quit out of that, run my npm start one more time. And you can see this time it was able to launch no problem. And it says the Swagger UI is available on localhost port 8080/docs. So if I click on that, you can see now I'm on localhost. Okay, if you are doing this as an assignment for me, this here is something that you would want to screenshot to show that you've got it running on your local host. So this shows me that it's running on your local host. All right, so now we've got it locally running. Let's play with it a little bit. I'm going to organize my screen so that we can see both things here. So we're past the troubleshooting, and we've also observed that we're running on localhost on the terminal, and we can see it in our URL address bar. So let's play with it a little bit. First, let's find an available pet using the pet find by status. So under pet, look for find by status. Click on that to expand it. And then if we click on try it out, we now can interact with this. So you can see that it already has some presets for available, pending, or sold. And if we were to go back here to the editor or into my YAML file, we would be able to see, oops, I want to search up here, available. You can see that there are ways you can set in the drop down what you're looking for. Okay, so I want to look for available pets. I'm going to hit execute, and this is going to show me the curl command. And you can see here the request URL it's using. It's still using PetStore3.swagger.io, which is also what this editor is using. But you can still see up here, I'm running my Swagger UI locally. All right. So just as a heads up for noticing that difference there. Okay, so my server response is this. You can see examples are this 200 is going to be successful. I got a 200 code, and then this is the response I got. And I can see ID number 2 is a cat, and the cat has a name called cat2. Or ID number 4 is a dog, and its name is dog1. I'm going to focus on ID number 7, which looks like it is a lion. All right, so in the next step, it says invoke the pet/pet ID get command, get endpoint, using the pet ID from step 1 above. So since I said I'm going to look for ID 7, let's go ahead and collapse this get. We're going to do get pet ID to find pet by ID. I can't do anything until I click on try it out. I said I want to look for ID number 7. Let's execute. and I can see that I've got pet number 7, which is in the category lions, and its name is Lion 1. Now, you can play with this a little bit if you'd like. And again, if you're doing this as an assignment for me, you'll get a screenshot basically of this server response and include your URL so I can see it's running on your local host. As a bonus step, let's look at updating our pet with some form data using the pet ID. So if we hit try it out, let's say this is number 7, remember. I want my lion to have the name Theodore, and the status is he's still available. Okay, and that because that was what I searched earlier, so I'm going to hit execute here. This is just for fun, you don't need to do this, but you can see that it's updated here. So if I were to go back into my get pet ID, and this is my earlier response, you can see his name was Lion 1. I'm going to execute. Now his name is Theodore. So you can see how I can interact with that API using this user interface, the Swagger UI. All right, let's go back to our steps here. So now we've been able to find by a status that's available. We've been able to find that pet specifically using the ID. Now we're going to place an order using a post command. We don't need pet right now, we need store. And we're going to do store and post an order. Let's do try it out. The pet ID is pet number 7. Remember, we got that from our very first step. I only want 1 of Theodore the lion. This is your order ID. So I'm going to just say it's order number 999. Ship date. Now, I believe there is something in here. The Swagger editor online populates fully, and for some reason these examples are not populating in my UI. You can see that these are blank. So the schema, for some reason that schema is not showing up. So I'm going to just go ahead and copy and paste what that date should look like. But normally if this were working fully, you would have that date in there. Completed, we're going to say true. Status is approved. Okay, so that's going to be my order information. And again, if you go back to editor next swagger.io, you'll be able to see the example with the schema fully filled out, so you know exactly what goes into your request body. And if we hit execute, we can see that I had a successful order, and this is my order ID for the pet number 7. And you've got all that information returned to you. So if you were doing this as an assignment, again, you could take a screenshot with this local host here showing your successful response. You can also, let's just do another bonus step here. That's not on our key feature steps, but let's go back to getting our pet, and let's get Theodore one more time. And you'll notice his status still says available. So what you'll see sometimes with APIs is we just placed an order, but it looks like the way this API is currently set up, I would have to do a second request to update the status once that order goes through. So that might be an additional step that happens within your system that then calls that once it completes successfully. So you've placed the order, and once it updates the state in the system, then it sends the request to update it. Let's go ahead and just do that manually just so you can see what you would potentially be automating in your system. So remember how I did a post to update Theodore earlier? Instead of available, let's now say he's sold. So this would be, again, after the order successfully places in your system, then something else triggers that post response or that post request. And then if I were to get my pet one more time, now I can see that Theodore has been sold. So sometimes APIs will need to go through multiple steps within your actual system. And that's okay to have those split up into different actions. Okay, so now we've placed our order. We've looked at our response body. We need to make note of our order ID. Remember that when I did that order, I put that ID in myself. This is not a super smart system. This is just a very simple example. But I put in order ID number 999. So now for our last example to play with, we're going to use store order ID. So store order / order ID. This is a GET request. We're going to try it out. I put in 999 as my order number, so I'm going to get that one, execute, and we can see that I got pet ID number 7, I got 1, I got the date that I had copied in, it's approved, and the completion is true. So again, if you're doing that as an assignment for me, capture with this URL and what your response body looks like. But that gives you an idea of some of the features that Swagger UI can offer you when you use Swagger Editor, like this, to edit the YAML, or use the Generate Server feature to take this simple YAML to quickly build a server to have this UI yourself. You can also generate the client. So you've got a great tool set here to really assist you in building some documentation that can really help speed your project along and really helps for your team or other teams that need to interact with your service to know exactly how to work the API and what features you have available to them. Thanks for your time.